A considerable amount of effort is put into naming magic cards. What's in a name? A lot more than you would think. Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles, and welcome to my video on naming conventions for Magic the Gathering. There is more depth to this subject than I had originally thought. In fact, there's more in the comprehensive rules just about a card name than I had thought. Take a look at this. It's massive. So, that aside, obviously that's not really what the video is about, just to give you an idea of the depth here. So, you would think, what's the big deal when it comes to naming magic cards? What do? You just come up with a cool name. Call him Slappy McSilly, ship it out the door. Here's the sword of stabbing. Done. Off you go kind of deal, right? No, obviously a lot more goes into it. First of all, some of the stuff is going to be fairly obvious if you stop and think about it. The reasons that they pick the names they do, in terms of the positives, you're looking at things. What they want to do is they want names that express what the card does. They want names that give a feel for the world, the set that the card is from as well. And obviously, you want it to sound cool as well. You want it to sound awesome. Now, they have different tricks that they use for this. They're basically the same kind of tricks that poets use. It's just language tricks where you, as long as you know how to put certain words together, you will get better results. It sounds more pleasing to the human ear. It reads better as well. So those are mainly the kind of guidelines they're looking for in terms of the positive aspects of a name. How it works is when cards are designed, they will submit multiple names with the card as well, going, here's an idea for a name, or multiple names, generally multiple ideally, and then that way they can pick one from it. Now, there aren't that many positive suggestions that they have in terms of do this or do this, but they do have a list of things that basically will kill a name. It's like, okay, this name is done for, or at least we can't use it in this regard. Like, all right, we're not going to name this card this. And honestly, even a slight change can make a big difference. Like if you take something like, let's say they have an artifact, it's a weapon called Gloom Blade, right? That's a very evocative name. It makes you think of like a blade somehow associated with darkness, and it could be something that poisons you, or it might even be something that basically poisons the soul and you just end up all melancholy and full of gloom or whatever, right? But if you just add a Y to that and it becomes Gloomy Blade, then all of a sudden that's a completely different sort of like weakish sound of, oh, just somebody who's mopey, and it conveys something completely different, and that's just with one letter change. So there are a list of reasons that they've given as to why they will specifically say, we are not going to use this name either for this card or at all. In some cases, it's just card specific. So the first reason they give for not using card names when they're submitted is simply that the card literally already exists with that name. So for example, Teleport. There's a card called Teleport. You can't submit Teleport because literally there is a card called Teleport. Now, they have other cards like Venser's Teleportation or things like that, right? Where they still use the word teleport, but the simple, succinct little one-word teleport, that's already been used. So they can't reuse that. Now, that reason is pretty obvious. I mean, that one almost goes without saying, but it is the top of their list. The second thing is names that sound too similar. An example of this is in the exact same set, they printed a 3/3, I think it was a beast. It's a guy who eats goblins. It's a beast creature that eats goblins, right? And its name is Clickslither. And then they also have slivers in this set. And they made a sliver that lets you put out slivers at instant speed. So it's called Quicksliver. Clickslither. Quicksliver. Clickslither. Quicksliver. You know what I mean? Like, you get those together. Now you add in the fact that the game specifically has cards that say, name a card, right? Boom. Well, all the information about a card is tied to its name, right? As you notice, it's not like as a card gets different artwork, it has different rules. All the rules about a card are specifically tied to that name. So you have to remember that. Everything about that card, all the rules baggage. If I say to you Thoughtseize, you may think any number of different pieces of art, but what your brain instantly thinks, if you know the card, and most of you will, is that's the one black discard I'm going to lose 2 life. Bam, right? You know that off the top of your head instantly by me saying Thoughtseize. But if they had different artworks that conveyed different things, it would work differently. So everything's rules-wise is tied to the name. All names on all Magic cards in any language are considered to be the English name. If you read through that giant block of rules text about just the name, you'll see what I'm talking about. It's pretty crazy. So, too similar. Clickslither Quicksilver, or Sliver, I should say. Those two things. And they also had Quicksilver Dragon as well, now that I think about it. And just as I just said, Quicksilver, Quicksilver. And if someone was to say shorthand, I'm going to remove all your Quicksilvers from the game, but they meant to say Quicksliver, and it's like, well, now we actually have confusion because you've referenced a name that could be two different cards in the same set. And that's basically when you're using a card that says, name a card, remove all copies from opponent's deck. You don't have to be able to name the card always, but you have to be able to specify it down to the point where it's one unique card in the format. You have to be able to get it to that level. So this kind of situation has a problem of that nature. They've gotten better at avoiding situations like that. One of the biggest problems they have with these kind of naming conventions is when it comes to tribal cards, because as you can imagine, if you're making a new set and you're introducing like dozens of new merfolk, for example, that you can see it right now with the Rivals of Ixalan, that's why you'd have things like Marrow, like there's different ways of referring to merfolk, right? In the past they would say Marrow. You've got all it's a way of allowing you to have overlap. Like you can have like a Marrow Ranger and you can have a Merfolk Ranger, and then, you know what I mean? Basically they're almost the same thing. They're both just Merfolk Rangers, but because you've picked this different name for the tribe, it allows you to keep creating creatures for that tribe, which is good, because honestly, I mean, people love their tribal stuff, and it would get really hard with the names if they just were always like, instead of Mog War Marshal, it was just Goblin War Marshal, things like that. Obviously it gets trickier. So that is why they have to limit names that are too similar. It would get way too confusing if all the goblins, if every goblin throughout history was just goblin and then another word in the name, it would be too much. Again, with the creature types, the third thing that will kill a name is names that contradict the creature types. So for example, if you had a flame elemental, you wouldn't call it Destructive Beast. Now, at first, you might think, well, a flame elemental can set buildings on fire. It would destroy things. It is destructive. Yes, but you wouldn't call it Destructive Beast, because Beast is a creature type that already exists in Magic. And by reading that name, most people are going to think it's a beast and wouldn't even look at the type line. They're just not going to come up with that. They might think it's a beast on fire or something else, or an elemental beast. And so that would make them play differently. So that is an issue. You could just call it Destructive Force or something like that, and that would help convey that, right? Now, the fourth rule they have is that it conflicts with the card type. So this one is pretty easy to understand once you get the concept. Like, for example, enchantment cards are meant to go on the board and stick around. They linger. So they shouldn't have names that sound like one-time effects, something that just happened. Like, basically, you would take a card like Flight, basically. I mean, nowadays, honestly, they would probably name it like something slightly different. But I'm going to use old school examples. I'm going to use Flight and Jump, okay? So Flight is a blue enchantment, and you put it on a creature. The creature has flying. It costs 1 blue, right? And it just enchants the creature. It's an aura under new rules. It's an aura that enchants a creature. That creature has flying. And Flight is something that sticks around, right? For example, Jump is the instant version, where 1 blue gives flying until end of turn, and you can feel the difference instantly between the names, right? Flight, I can fly around whenever I want. Jump, 1 big bound, right? And that's exactly what's happening. That Flight is like 1 gigantic jump arc. So the names convey the concepts perfectly. Now, those kind of tight little names and that kind of conveyance is exactly what they want. That's the best. When you can look at a card, you can look at the name of Flight, and you're going to understand what it does right away. And pretty much the same thing with Jump. I can make a creature jump. It's conveyed in the artwork. It's conveyed in the name. It's well done. So those are examples of excellent naming. Now, number 5 is that it doesn't fit with Magic naming conventions. And what I mean by that is, if there's a long-standing cycle of something, like, for example, the Circles of Protection were a cycle that everybody knows from back in the day, where they're all enchantments that let you pay mana to prevent damage from a source that the circle protects against. So they wouldn't then make another called like Circle of Protection Knights, and then what actually does is it puts 5 2/2 knight tokens into play, and the artwork shows like a walker surrounded by 5 knights in a ring protecting him. So conceptually, you're like, oh, it's a Circle of Protection created out of knights. I get it, because any Magic player would see that and be like, no, Circle of Protection Knights would protect against knights. That's what my brain says, because every single Circle of Protection, it's like, guys, it's like going and getting a milk carton and you open it up and there's apple juice, and it's just like, guys, this is milk. You can't go milk apple juice. Like, that doesn't work. Milk apple. Like, it's sort of that sort of mental what? So that is one thing that they'll kill a name for that reason. But you can't use that because it contradicts with the current naming convention for Magic the Gathering. And that's another reason they actually have to be careful with name uses, because once they start to do things like that, they're creating what they're going to have to stick with going into the future. They won't break from that in most cases because it causes cognitive dissonance. Number 6 is keyword use in names where the cards don't have that keyword. So you're not going to see storm in a lot of creatures' names because they don't have the storm keyword. You're not going to see, they would never put like first of all, they would never put first strike in the name of a creature because it's clunky and would sound ugly. Like you couldn't have Knight of First Strike, it would sound retarded. But if they did create a Knight of First Strike and it didn't have First Strike, your brain would go, what is going on? It's like when they printed Whippoorwill from the Dark and the card is a bird and it's shown mid-flight. It's literally shown mid-flight and it has a bird's name and it doesn't have flying. And your brain just goes, what? Same thing happened to me in Force of Will. There's a phoenix. There's a flaming phoenix bird. And I always thought it had flying. But no, it has haste. It's so confusing. Anyways, so that's another reason that they won't use particular names. If it happens to overlap with keywords that exist in Magic, and there are a ton of keywords, so that can happen easily. Name saving. Now, this is one where, cards I just said, like flight, like teleport, anything that's a short, tight, easy, understandable name instantly, like a word that you will instantly get from the English language that conveys a particular concept, is incredibly meaningful to Wizards. So they need to find a card that really holds it. If you want a good example of that, look at incinerate. The word incinerate, pretty much everybody knows what that means. Just burn to ash with fire, right? Just gone, flamed, gone. So incinerate is a card that burns a creature for 3 or a player, and if it happens to kill a creature, that creature can't be regenerated and gets removed from the game. And that makes perfect sense. It's literally been burned to ashes. You can't regenerate from that. There's nothing left. The card and the name are perfect. There's no part of your brain that goes from the name to reading the text and goes, I don't get it. In fact, the name leads you into already understanding what's about to happen with this card. Incinerate. Well, I imagine that burns something up. So that's the perfect example. So nowadays they hold tightly to those names. And that's why when they came out with Abrade in Hour of Devastation, you could tell it was going to be a good card. Because that's one of those tight little beautiful words. And once they've used Abrade, they can only go like abraded this or blah, blah, blah of abrasion or all this other stuff. But they can't just use that tight little abrade. So they picked it for a card with pop. And that's how they do it now. They save the names. Another reason that they'll kill names, and this one's pretty obvious, is if it just doesn't fit within the set. Like if it doesn't fit in the world, we'll be like, sorry, that flavor doesn't fit for the world. And we talked about that earlier. The name is supposed to try and help convey what the set's about. So if it goes against that, it's going to get axed. The card's going to get renamed. And the last thing, and this one is another common sense one, is they try and avoid names that are really hard to pronounce. Basically, the concept is if it would make you hesitate because you don't know how to say it before you would say it, then they're going to try and leave that out. Now, I think that this is great. Some people may consider this a dumbing down, but I think that they are pretty good about expanding their vocabulary and throwing a lot of stuff in there. They threw up the example themselves of Merfolk Regery or whatever. I'm not sure 100% how to pronounce it, but that one's an interesting one because that's some kind of like king or nobleman from, I don't remember specifically what language it's from, but it's cool that they bring those things in when it feels like they will work and avoid the ones that are too tricky. Magic is a very complicated game with a lot of moving pieces. If you have to spend additional mental energy sitting there parsing out how to pronounce cards, that can actually cause a problem. And I was thinking about it. We're all animals and we're wired to conserve energy. And it's theoretically possible that you may be less likely to play or mention cards that have names that you can't pronounce because it costs you extra energy. And as a result, there may be a slight tactical advantage for players who would use these unpronounceable cards going, guys, I don't want to deal, the people who don't want to deal with those cards would just pick other targets. Now, again, that's just theoretical. I thought that was a funny little thought to throw in at the end in terms of food for thought. So that's the list of what really will kill off a name. We already covered what's good in a name. I think overall they've got a pretty good philosophy for it. Their naming conventions work for me. And most of the time I don't look at Magic card names and go, these are ridiculous. They put a good amount of effort into naming the cards, making sure the artwork and flavor text all fit together. They didn't do it as much back in the day, so it's more obvious now. I guess my only complaint about the new cards is they feel more homogenized with the art and things like that. But otherwise, this is about names, so that's an aside for another time. Thanks for coming by, my friends, and hearing what I had to say. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time. But before I bounce, I do have to say, welcome to the newest Golden Lord of Purple, Chicken Bone. I know you've been hanging around for a while, my bro. Glad you finally decided to jump on board. We will see you in the final roll, the roll of honor at the end of the video. Peace out, my friends. A considerable amount of effort goes into naming Magic cards. What's in a name? More than you would... God damn it.
That was going so good.
I know. That's funny.
What's in the name?
More.
And together, we are the sixth color of magic.
Perp Media, we the best card boys.